Good evening. I want to welcome you to another segment of the Jermaine Brown Sports Talk Show. Today is Saturday, October the 7th, 2023. Now, I was going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks trade for Damian Lillard, but I'll wait until the NBA season starts before I give my opinion on that. But tonight's topic is going to be about an interesting topic because I actually wasn't planning on making a video tonight, however, or this week. However, there was an interesting topic that came up that I wanted to discuss, and it's involving Justin Fields. Now, anybody who knows me and knows, how I felt with Fields coming out in that 2021 draft there with Trevor Lawrence. I felt he was neck and neck, and I felt it should have been Trevor Lawrence 1, Fields number 2. That's the two top quarterbacks coming out. However, that didn't play out that way. Trevor Lawrence did go number 1, but Fields was the 4th quarterback drafted out of that draft. That's neither here nor there at this point. However, everyone knows that anybody who knows me knows I've been a big defender of Justin Fields, but unfortunately, because of his play earlier this season, the first few games, I was really forced to stay quiet because I felt that the Jets they made a mistake drafting Zach Wilson, in my opinion. I would have drafted Justin Fields over Zach Wilson, but the Jets drafted Zach Wilson. And I was very vocal about it last year because of what Fields has done. Now, this year, Fields has taken a major step back, at least early this season, at least before the last 2 games. And the last 2 games is what I'm going to particularly talk about. But before I get to that, so I was really forced to stay quiet because Fields was not playing well, and regardless as to whose fault it is, nor was he winning games. I mean, Chicago was just basically on a massive losing streak. So it was hard to defend Fields' play, and I could not defend drafting Justin Fields over Zach Wilson. I really couldn't defend either one, but definitely could not defend drafting Justin Fields over Zach Wilson by Fields' play earlier in this season. Because, like I said, regardless whose fault it is, you're the quarterback. The quarterback is the most recognized position in the sport. And there's an old saying that when things go well, the quarterback gets too much credit when things go well, which is true. And he gets too much blame when things go poorly, which is also true. So 2 things can be true at the same time. And so when that happens, it is what it is. You can't get all the credit when things go well, but then when things go poorly, it's someone else's fault. It doesn't work that way. So, and then not only that, they're generally the first to get paid the big money, and they're usually the highest paid player on the team. So that's just the way it works. And so when you have those elements in your working for you, it is what it is. You are expected to lead, play well, and win games. So that's your job as the quarterback. Fair or not, that's just what it is. And so not only was he not winning, but he wasn't playing well. As a matter of fact, he was regressing. And though I put a lot of the onus and the fault on the organization because of their poor quarterback development, history of poor quarterback development, Fields also has to take some responsibility for his play. That's just the way it works. Now, the last 2 games is what becomes interesting because after Fields called out the coaching staff, Fields, the coaching staff said, okay, since you called us out, we're going to open up, take the reins off. Well, in other words, we're going to open up the playbook. Now we're going to put the onus on you to see if you can play this position. And the last 2 games, he's done very well. I mean, he's thrown for over 600 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception the last 2 games. Now, if he continues playing like this is what's going to cause an interesting dilemma. And the reason why the topic is so important tonight is because Chris Canty, who used to play in the NFL, and he used to play, he was a really good player in the NFL, but that's neither here nor there. there was an interesting point that he made during the conversation as to whether Justin Fields could be the long term or is the long term answer in Chicago. Now, before I get to what he said, my view was because of Fields' play early, the first 2 to 3 games this season, I felt it was time for him as well as the organization to move on. So I'm gonna just put that disclaimer out there. I thought he needed a new start, and I thought the organization needed a new start, which means the organization goes for Caleb Williams and Justin Fields goes somewhere else. So that was my position. And so I would be a hypocrite to sit up here and tell you differently. That was my position after 3 games this season, particularly after, the Kansas City game. I said, this isn't going to work. And, so here's what Chris Canty brought up. And it's a good conversation and good food for thought. And that's what is this discussion about tonight. He mentioned that right now Fields is hot. Right now he's one of the hottest quarterbacks in the league the last 2 weeks. The way he's playing like a franchise caliber quarterback. And why this is important is because the Bears got their first victory this past Thursday against the Washington Commanders. So congratulations to the Bears. They finally broke that 14-game losing streak, which is going to make it now harder for them to get Caleb Williams. But they still own Carolina's first pick due to last year's draft. So now the question was, should the Bears continue with Justin Fields or should they bail? And Chris Canty felt that they should bail because why? Not because he doesn't think that Justin Fields can play, but he made some very valid points. That right now Fields is hot. And when he's hot, he's going to have a trade demand because a lot of people think that he can still play the position at a high level. And so Chris Canty's theory was trade Justin Fields now. So this way, so this way you don't win more games and you can stay in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes because it's about Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is going to be the #1 quarterback in this draft. He's considered a generational talent, yada, 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 yada. So his position was because Justin Fields is in his 3rd season. And after the 3rd season, the spring of the end of the 3rd season, the organization has to make a decision whether they're going to pick up his 5th-year option or not. Okay? Or they have to look to start extending him at some point. Now, it doesn't mean that he's in a contract year, but he's in a proverbial contract year, even though he's not technically in one. Because now after this season, the organization is going to have to decide whether they're going to commit the franchise tag or long-term to Justin Fields. The organization got to start making those decisions after this season. And Chris Canty does have a point. If you commit the franchise tag or you extend him, it's going to cost you a lot more than to reset the quarterback market. Why the resetting the quarterback market may make some sense is because the quarterback, let's say they finish #1 with the first pick and they end up able to get Caleb Williams, just for the sake of the conversation. They can sign him to a 5-year deal like for $37 million. Now, if you do the math, that's not a lot of money over 5 years. Okay? That's just because, and most of that money is in the final season. So the first few years, Chicago's really going to be paying very little to no money at the quarterback position, which means he said you can put a lot of talent around Caleb Williams. And that, in theory, is true. You can do that. So he says it's cheaper to set the quarterback market than to pay Justin Fields what it's going to cost you. And in theory, and technically, he's right. It is going to be cheaper. So he made a lot of valid points. He says, because if he continues playing well, he's going to make it harder for you to to draft Caleb Williams. As a matter of fact, it's going to be impossible if he continues playing well. It's going to be impossible for a number of reasons. Even if somehow Carolina ends up with the number one pick, which will go to Chicago. If Justin Fields keeps playing well, it's going to be almost difficult, if not impossible, to move off of him. That's just the reality. Okay? That's why the Giants was in the position that they were in last year, because Joe Shane, who's the GM of the Giants, and Brian Daboll, who's the coach of the Giants, did not draft Daniel Jones. But they inherited Daniel Jones. But they said, well, we're not going to pick up his fifth-year option, which they didn't. And then on top of that, he was basically in a contract year. Well, Daniel Jones played well. I mean, he wasn't great, but he played well enough that he put the Giants in a bind. We either pay Daniel Jones about $40 million per, or we move off of Daniel Jones. And we know what the Giants did. The Giants went ahead and gave Daniel Jones the money, and now they look like they're having what is called buyer's remorse, because now you're stuck, and that can happen. So, see, that's the downside to paying the quarterback, because now it puts you in difficult positions. And it's not going to be easy to just move off of Daniel Jones without it really costing you. And if the Giants end up with the number one pick, I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to draft Caleb Williams, and you just trade Daniel Jones, or you could cut him. You'll just take the hit financially. Now, cutting him will be cost prohibitive. They'll just simply bench him for Caleb Williams. And basically, it's just like if they're paying Caleb Williams that money, even though they're not. They'd be paying the position. So just know that the Giants will do that if they end up with the number one pick, which is a high probability because the Giants aren't very good. But this is not about the Giants. This is about the Bears and what they should do. And again, I thought Chris Canty made some excellent points. However, there is some risk to what Chris Canty, the theory that Chris Canty came with, and here's a few of the risks. If we put on our thinking caps and just think this through. Now, I do believe that Caleb Williams could be a generational talent quarterback. They're saying the second coming of Patrick Mahomes and all that other stuff. Okay. And he's got that kind of ability. However, Patrick Mahomes is with a coach who has a history of doing very well with quarterbacks, and that's Andy Reid. I don't know if Patrick Mahomes would be this good if Andy Reid wasn't his coach. He would be good, but I don't know if he would be this good. See, so coaching does matter. And the Bears don't have that. So the first problem is and the Bears don't have a history of developing quarterbacks. They just don't. So that's the first thing working against Chris Canty's argument. Here's the next thing working against Chris Canty's argument. Let's say you are the GM, who is Ryan Poles. Okay? There's no guarantee. If, let's say, you end up with the number one pick this year because your team stinks, and your record is you have the number one pick. There's no guarantee you're going to be the one picking Caleb Williams. Because the ownership could say, you know what? I don't like the direction you're going in. We're cleaning house. And then now he can bring in somebody else. And now that whole argument of, well, I didn't pick Justin Fields. I didn't draft Justin Fields. I didn't pick him. He wasn't the quarterback that I want. See, it's hard to make that argument, and here's why. Because at the end of the day, you took the job knowing that Justin Fields was the quarterback. Or you took the job knowing that the coach was the head coach. So if that's not the coach or the quarterback you want, then you should maybe not take the job. Because you run the risk that you might not be able to pick the guy you want to pick or make the move you want to make. Just ask John Izek, who used to be the GM of the Jets, how that worked out. He was in the Seattle organization. The Jets, Rex Ryan was the head coach. So John Izek ended up getting the job as GM, but under the agreement that he keeps Rex Ryan at least for a year. So he agreed to keep Rex Ryan for a year. And then at the end of the year, he wanted to fire Rex, but the owner came into the locker room and said Rex was going to be back, which messed up John Isaac's plan because John Isaac wanted to fire Rex. And then the Jets was putrid the following year. So what did the owner did? He not only let Rex go, he let the GM go. So you see, that's the downside to not taking a job when you don't have the guy that you want. So, and then not only that, um, this is not the only time that has happened. This has happened before. So there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to draft Caleb Williams. And even if the owner does allow you to stay and draft Caleb Williams, you got to know that the Bears are going to be probably a bad team next year too, because rarely a team goes from worse, the number one pick, to first or anything like that. It usually takes a couple of years. Well, guess what? After that season, so even let's say you're fortunate enough to be in position to draft Caleb Williams, there's no guarantee you're going to see the second season of Caleb Williams. See, so that's the downside to tanking this year for Caleb Williams, because that means you're going to be doing what? More losing. So if you're Ryan Poles, you really got to look at this from a different lens. Not only that, here's another thing working against Ryan Poles. You're African American. And see, African Americans don't get the same leeway that non-African Americans get, if you understand what I'm getting at. Okay, they tend to get a shorter leash. There's an old saying in corporate America, but it also applies to the NFL. Last hired, first fired. And that tends to be the case when it comes to African Americans. And so when you get these GM jobs and stuff like that, and they got an African American as a GM, you got to be careful, because you can't keep losing games, because it works against you, and then the media will turn on you. And so unfortunately, your dark skin is working against you. They're not going to say it, but that's just the reality. So if you're Ryan Poles, you're really tied to Justin Fields, because there's no guarantee that you're going to be the one drafting Caleb Williams. And even if you do get the privilege to draft Caleb Williams, if you don't win and do very well the following season, rarely do you see a team who's drafting number one do very, very well the following season. They usually still have a losing record the following season. You're going to most likely be out the door, which means now the next GM gets the benefit of building around Caleb Williams. You see the problem? Because why? How did you get the job? You got the job because they fired Ryan Pace. Ryan Pace was the previous GM to Ryan Poles here in Chicago. And Ryan Pace was the one who drafted Mitchell Trubisky when he could have had Deshaun Watson. But he drafted Mitchell Trubisky because Trubisky drove a nice used car, so he thought he was humble. Some stupidity. No, you should have known. Draft the guy if he can play the position. But this is not about Mitchell Trubisky. So Ryan Poles drafted Mitchell Trubisky. He didn't win with Mitchell Trubisky. So he got the privilege of drafting Justin Fields. But the problem is, you had a down season, a losing season with Justin Fields. And what did the owner do? He fired you and the coach. So you didn't get the privilege of developing Justin Fields. You didn't get the chance to see that to fruition. And where you at now? You're not a GM now. See, those jobs are hard to get. So when you get them, you want to try to do everything you can to keep them. They're even harder to get than, say, coaching jobs. So that's another problem with the argument, Chris Canty's argument of moving off of Fields and tanking for Caleb Williams. That's another problem. And I know he didn't take these things into account, but these are issues that you got to take into account. Because I'm gonna tell you another guy who can't afford to tank for Caleb Williams. That's Matt Eberflus, okay, and Luke Getzey. Matt Eberflus, the head coach of the Bears, and Luke Getzey, the offensive coordinator of the Bears. They cannot afford to tank for Caleb Williams. Their job depends on the success of Justin Fields. Why do I say that? Because they lost 14 games in a row, and really most of those games was due to they were tanking. They were trying to lose to get the highest draft pick they can get to revamp the organizations. And they started getting rid of guys after the previous season, not last season, but the season prior. They started getting rid of guys because they wanted to tear it down and rebuild. The problem with tearing you down and rebuilding is you're losing. And unfortunately, that goes against your record. And if you don't have a track history of success at your position, and this was Matt Eberflus' first job as the head coach, you don't have much leeway. You're not Bill Belichick or Andy Reid or one of those guys like Sean Payton who's got a runway, or Mike Tomlin. You don't have no track record of success as a head coach. So you don't have a long leash or a long runway. That's just the way it works. And not only that, you're in a city like Chicago, which is similar to New York, where they want demand, they have demands and they want everything right away. That's just the way it works. So Matt Eberflus was losing a lot of games. So the rumor mill, the scuttlebutt out there was, if he had lost this past Thursday, he was going to get fired. So if he gets fired, now you ain't coaching Caleb Williams. So, I'm certain he was hearing those rumors. And though the organization didn't deny it, they didn't confirm it either. They didn't deny it. They didn't say that there's no truth to these rumors and yada yada. He's safe. There was none of that. But the rumors were out there. So he has to look at it, and he's not a dumb individual. Neither is Luke Getzey. They're not dumb individuals. They hear the rumors out there. And if there's a coaching change, that means, yeah, you're not in a position to coach Caleb Williams. So look at it this way. If you're Matt Eberflus, you will not be coaching Caleb Williams. So you either got to make it work, you're going to be sinking or swimming with Justin Fields. Same thing with Luke Getzey. You're going to sink or swim with Justin Fields. Because if you don't make the Fields thing work, you're going to get fired. I can pretty much tell you that right now. Ryan Poles, I'm not so certain about. But the head coach and the offensive coordinator, it's going to be bye-bye, sayonara, see you later. So you have to and they knew this, especially once Justin Fields came out and said they were the reason for his lack of development. So they said, okay, we are really stuck with this guy. If we don't make it work with these guys, we're out of a job. We don't get to coach Caleb Williams. We can't use the argument, well, I didn't want to coach Justin Fields. You shouldn't have taken the job. See, that's the problem. You took the job, so you're on the hook with Justin Fields. That's just the way it works. So they saw that. So what did they start doing? Opening up the offense, throwing the ball to DJ Moore, who they spent a lot of money to get, because they had to sign them to a new deal and all this other stuff. Okay. So, I mean, they had to trade for him and all this other stuff. Okay. So they had to get the ball. Now, all of a sudden, the DJ Moore Justin Fields connection the last two games have been heating up. Because why? They're throwing the ball to him, which they really didn't do much of the first 3 weeks, the first 3 games of the season. They really didn't throw the ball much to him. Well, now they're getting him the ball, and you're seeing tremendous things the last 2 weeks. And Fields is looking like that dude. And so if you're Ryan Poles, if you're Matt Eberflus, if you're Luke Getzey, your best bet is to really lean in on Justin Fields. And if that's the case and he does well, yes, you're going to have to pay him. If he doesn't do well, there's a good chance you might not be around to draft Caleb Williams. And not only that, by you winning, because see, right now, when you were still undefeated, I mean, not undefeated, when you're still winless, which means you had 0 victories, you was in the number 1 pole position to draft Justin Fields. And because Carolina and you own their pick is still winless, Carolina is in the number 2 pick. So as long as you kept losing, you would have been able to draft Caleb Williams. The problem is you won last week. I mean, this Thursday. So now that dropped you from first to like fourth. So now there's 3 other teams ahead, 3 to 4 other teams ahead of you. Carolina is still ahead of you. But if Carolina wins a couple of games, and they're going to probably win a couple of games, because there's no incentive for Carolina to tank because Carolina doesn't own their first round pick. So if Carolina wins a couple of games, now you're no longer in a position to draft Caleb Williams. Now losing does not help you. And Caleb Williams, in my opinion, Caleb Williams is the only quarterback worth tanking for. Drake May, who may end up being great, and he's really good, he's not worth tanking for. Michael Penix Jr., or the quarterback from Washington, he's excellent. He's going to be a first round pick, most likely, even though he's got some knee issues because he's had torn ACLs on his knees the last few years. He's most likely going to be a first round pick, but he's not worth tanking for. Shedeur Sanders, should he come out, he's probably going to be the third quarterback off the board after Drake May, but he's not worth tanking for. None of those guys are worth tanking for other than Caleb Williams. It is what it is. And even if you tank for Caleb Williams, there's no guarantee Caleb Williams is going to turn out to be all of that. There's no guarantees. There is no guarantees in sports. But let's just assume he is. You've made it now by you winning this Thursday. And remember, players are not in the habit of tanking. Management may want them to tank. Ownership they're part of management, may want them to tank. Fans and media may want them to tank, but players and coaches is not in the tanking business. I'll give you an example. Back in 2020 or the 2021 season, the Jets were winless. And as long as we were winless, because I'm a Jet fan, by the way, for those who don't know, as long as we stayed winless, we would have been able to draft Trevor Lawrence. And to me, I wanted Trevor Lawrence, but not at the expense of going winless. I don't like the idea of my team not being able to win a game. And my dad pointed out that, yeah, even though it would be bad for you to go winless, but at least now you'll have your quarterback for the next decade or so. You'll have your franchise guy, which is what the Jets really needed. But I just did not want, and my cousin was the same way. But I was like, no, I don't want to go winless to do it. I thought the Jets would do the smart thing, which would be draft Justin Fields, but I counted on the Jets having some common sense. And I was wrong. They went and drafted Zach Wilson, and that's that. And so that we know the history, the Jets do not have a good history of drafting the right quarterbacks. We just don't. Okay? So anyway, now who was the coach then? See, the coach and the players, even though they were losing all these games, the coach was like, hey, look, and the players was like, there's no guarantees we're going to be around to draft if you were able to get Trevor Lawrence. So there was a game against the Rams, and the Rams were really good at this time. Okay, the Rams were really good. But somehow the Jets beat the Rams. And here I'm celebrating because at least now we finally got that first victory. And it was late in the season. It was like game 14 or 15 or whatever. In other words, the Jets just had to lose 2-3 more times and we would have been the number 1 seed or the number 1 pick. We would have had the number 1 pick. But I just did not want my Jets to go winless. Sorry. And I'm still bothered by that, going winless. But by winning that game, we now went from the number 1 position, the pole position, to the number 2 position. Now, it didn't help the coach. It didn't help the players because at the end of the day, the coach still got fired, which he was going to get fired anyway. So he was never going to be in a position to draft Trevor or the coach Trevor Lawrence. That's just the reality. Adam Gase. I had to go look it up. I'm sorry. Uh, as you get older, you tend to forget things that you know. But yes, Adam Gase. Adam Gase was the head coach of the New York Football Jets. Let me stop saying New York Football Jets. That's the New York Football Giants. But the New York Jets, Adam Gase was the head coach. Now, Adam Gase was, they had a horrible season that year in 2020, but he didn't have the pleasure of coaching Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson or just he wouldn't have had that pleasure because he was getting fired at the end of that season. So there was no benefit for him to tank. Just like there was no benefit for those players to tank. And recently, the Miami Dolphins was involved in a tanking scandal, and the league ultimately fined and suspended the owner because of it. But there should be more to it. But Brian Flores accused the owner of wanting to tank for Tua Taglio, Tua, Tua. I can't have trouble pronouncing his last name. But the thing is this. Tua didn't turn out to be the best quarterback in that draft. Joe Burrow would have been, but it had Flores did what the owner wanted, they would have been able to. They would have been in a position to draft Joe Burrow instead of Tua. So the owner was upset because again, he didn't do. Flores did not do what the owner wanted. The owner wanted them to tank. But Flores knew that tanking, first of all, if it got out that he tried to tank, those players in the locker room loses respect for him. So, and if they lose respect for him, you're gonna lose the locker room, which you're ultimately gonna get fired anyway. So Brian Flores was against it. He said, I'm not tanking. So he tried to win as many games as he could, which he did. And so they were no longer in a position to draft Joe Burrow. And now the owner is very upset. So that ultimately led to Brian Flores' dismissal anyway. But Brian Flores, who is non-white, really, he's African American. See, they worked against him. Now another coach who was accused of tanking, Lovie Smith, when he tanked for Jameis Winston, and he did tank for Jameis Winston. Look what ultimately happened. He got one season of Jameis Winston, and then he got fired. See, so tanking does not help the coach. And it doesn't really help the GM who does the tanking. It doesn't help them. Because why? Losing is against your record. That's just the way it is. And so the more games you lose, the easier it is for management, ownership to get rid of you. So you don't benefit from when things get better. You don't benefit from it. The next GM or the next coach benefits from it. And Matt Eberflus is not in a position that he could afford. And this is why I would have brought this up to Chris Canty. Matt Eberflus is not in a position where he could afford to tank for Caleb Williams, because I can assure you he won't be coaching Caleb Williams. Because if the rumors are that he was going to get fired mid-season, then that means there's a high probability he's gone at the end of the season. His job is tied to the current guy. And he can't go into the owner's office arguing, well, I didn't draft Justin Fields. I didn't want Justin Fields. That argument's not going to work with him. I can tell you that right now. And Ryan Poles is in a dangerous spot doing that. So again, though I understand what Chris Canty was talking about, if I am Ryan Poles, or if and definitely if I'm Matt Eberflus, I'm going to do everything in my power to make certain Justin Fields is successful. Because if Justin Fields is successful, that will help me keep my job. Because the more games we win, the harder it's going to be for them to fire me. Then I can go in there and say, listen, we're improving. Look what we are doing. Now it's not just rhetoric, it's going to be, you can see it. And if you're showing improvement, that tends to back ownership off. That tends to back the fan base off because all fans wants to see is that you're improving. If you are improving and the fans can see it and media can see it and ownership can see it, that's usually the best way of keeping your job. Just know that that's the way it works. But I want to thank you for watching another segment of the Jermaine Brown Sports Show. Have a good evening.